Hello and welcome to this very special edition of, I guess, the drone racing news. A bit of a different shake-up for today, but nonetheless, this is the wrap-up for the Australian Drone Nationals, which occurred just over a month ago. It's taken us a little while to recover.
Oh, hasn't it?
A very tough event for everyone involved, not just us who are running the stream and the commentary in the event as general, but for pilots as well. It's a tough event. But this is the opportunity now to go through all the highs, the lows, the drama, and the spectacle that occurred at that event up in Townsville back in September.
Highlight scores and stats, right?
Oh, exactly. It's kind of the sports wrap-up, Tim. So, first up, let's talk about our 5-inch champion. For the first time ever, we have a new champion. Well, it was the first time in what?
Oh, 6 years. Yeah.
2018, I believe. We have a new Australian Drone Nationals champion. Young Wilf from FPV Rebels took the crown in a Chase the Ace event that went for 4 rounds, which is something we haven't seen in a long time.
It's more exciting when it goes more than 2 always, isn't it?
Yeah, so we saw Wilf. I actually thought, when watching it, Wilf was going to take the victory in two runs. You know, he won the first one, very likely to win the second, except IQ Zero there managed to really show that class. He was our TQ, obviously, for the event. He won the second one, and then disaster struck in the third event.
That was so unfortunate for him. I mean, and we were rooting for him too, because we felt like it was his turn. He'd been grinding for that trophy the longest than the rest. And I know Wilf showed up in last year, right, for his
first one.
Yeah, that was his first one. Relatively unknown, but just, you know, he was pumping out all that fast DVR, so we just knew he was capable.
So in the third Chase the Ace, in fact, I believe it was Wilf's XT60 melted off the ESC.
Oh, was that what it was?
That was what happened. IQ Zero, I believe, crashed out, and that allowed Davey from Canberra to take an ace.
I was so proud of him for that move.
It was very exciting. And then we went down to the final race, what ended up being the final race. Watching and commentating that race was amazing. You saw Wilf out in front of IQ Zero the whole first 2 laps. 0.3 of a second was the difference between IQ Zero and Wilf over those sectors over the first 2 laps, until a crash or an error from IQ Zero getting stuck in the triple gates.
Triple gate, yeah.
Yeah, and that allowed Wilf to take the win. So a fantastic 5-inch racing there. Any other comments, thoughts, Tim?
I'm trying to actually recall back. It was It was all so late. There were such long days, but yeah, by that point it was such a blur. I was definitely excited to see that the Chase the Ace format played out really well. I think pilots really enjoyed the double elimination, and changing back from single was quite good too.
The only thing I think that would have changed it up, which would have probably made the event one to remember for the ages, is if in that 4th race, Bones took an ace.
The crowd for Bones.
The crowd would have gone wild.
You know how I think in the last episode I recalled about the chat that we had for Daniel Eyre in 2018 about Take My Energy. That crowd that was present there for the Bones and the chanting like a pack of hyenas was probably one of the peak experiences for me to watch.
It was actually at the point where we had to tell them to calm down because it was so distracting to the pilots competing in the finals. It was too much. The echoing noise reverberating off the top of the grandstand for the Bones chants. We had to tell them to calm down a little bit.
Yeah. It was almost like those final races should almost be like a game of golf where we have silence on the track.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a new rule for the future.
Yeah, so Wilf taking away the victory. Well done. We are now 3 Australian Drone Nationals 5-inch champions to put into the record books.
But how about that bottom 48?
Yes, now bottom 48, Jegs from Outer Heaven won the bottom 48, meaning he places in 49th. That's all I've actually got in the notes, because,
that could have been me, though.
Could have been you guys. Remember, you came out of nowhere. In fact, we ended up in the race together.
We did, didn't we?
And we did, and I blew a motor off the start blocks, and if I had have stayed on that race, me and you could have continued in the competition, which would have caused chaos for the event.
Did we both end in the same race, though?
Yeah, well, yes.
Okay.
And you progressed further.
That's right.
Yes. And there was a bit of a Brad reaction there for you.
No, that was good. Yeah, that was my best Brad reaction, I think, of any Nationals.
Continue on with the racing, though. That's 5-inch out of the way. Could you tell us who won freestyle in the 5-inch class?
Freestyle?
Yeah, no, it was gone, and we were all the better for it. So we're back onto this racing now, X-Class racing.
Yeah, all I can think about there is the fires.
Fire everywhere. Like the joke has been played to death now, saying that the X-Class racing was lit. It was Scotty Townsville was out there putting out fires every 5 minutes.
He came into close contact many times throughout that event. None was better. Of all the fires, the best one though, I think, was you or him kicking off the battery from the drone from the start.
Oh, that was actually a 5-inch one as well, yes.
That was a 5-inch one.
Yep.
And unfortunately, I went back and scrubbed through those footage and all that replay trying to find that moment. It was by miracle that we were actually at an ad break at that time, so I have no evidence of that footage.
But yeah, with X-Class Racing, Phoenix FPV from Townsville took the win in that one.
Yeah, but what was weird was that he took second in the Beast class.
In Beast class,
and Gecko took first. It's almost like they just traded
They
places.
basically traded. Yeah, certainly. Again, X-Class and Beast class is absolutely dominated by Townsville pilots. I believe there was a West Coast pilot who was going to fly in Beast class.
There was.
He pulled out before the competition started.
Yeah, and there was one other, I think, as well. Another 2 West Coast pilots, I think, that both withdrew before it started. So, unfortunately, the entire roster of that competition was just dominated by Townsville pilots.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see whether there is many of them who would travel outside of Townsville if the event was to be somewhere else.
We'll touch on that in a little bit second once we finish up with all the other results.
Right.
But with this year's nationals, with the removal of freestyle, allowed us to add some different events into this competition and some. Call them novelty.
I was going to say, is novelty fair?
Novelty, for some of them I'd say fair, but others were racing. They were pure racing events with just some restrictions. And in particular, I'm talking about the old dogs.
The old dogs.
Now, bit of drama with the old dogs. Obviously, before the event, the talk was that they're going to fly the 5-inch track in reverse.
That's right, yep.
It scared off some of the older dogs.
So the older demographic were not happy with that. The younger demographic were cool with that. And there was a compromise that needed to be met somehow. Otherwise, I think we have a situation where people would not compete in it, and then it's not as fun when you only have half the numbers you expect for something like that.
And ultimately, I think we had a bit of a say in that. We realised that it was going to be a nightmare to marshal that, to understand and make sure that people are actually doing the track correctly backwards. Yeah. So in the old dogs, Fox Ewer from Taiwan took the win. Bit of a dark horse. Not many people really knew who he was, where he was. I didn't even know that he was over 40 to begin with.
No, those Asian genes are very much in his favour. Same with CGO as well. Doesn't look a day over 35.
Yeah, I guess you can say that.
So, and what I noticed about that event too is that with the way the track line, that was like racing back in 2015, where it was tracks like that with only a couple of gates and flags and big long area coverage. So that was one where you could see the batteries being really hammered, and it felt like old school racing again to me.
Yeah, it was good. Foxy, he probably should have got his passport checked or something like that. I'm not sure because. It didn't look over 40. I look older than him.
It's much too late now.
Anyway, on top of that, we also then had the club top 2. So where the top 2 pilots in qualifying for each club got to race again on that X-Class track. Despite all the fast boys who were expecting to be in that competition, they were practicing quite heavily on the sim.
That part of the event was pretty challenging for me. In that I'd set it up and scored it a certain way and then had to make really last minute changes for scheduling stuff. And I think I even had this idea about how it'd be scored and it just didn't line up. So I think we have a better idea about how to do that in the future, I think. And I think it'd be good to see more inclusion, I think, with the clubs there in some sort of way of... Because in the end, I think in the finals, it ended up with 2 Townsville pilots were flying.
I'm not sure how that worked out.
Because it was based off how I did the, I think the military international drone racing tournament scoring in the past, right? And I was expecting some sort of ranking and then position scoring and then numbers there and all this maths, I suppose. So I guess it was much more exciting just to have individuals make it to a final race and that individual then won it for their club, right? So I think it's more exciting and easier to follow.
The other little bit of controversy out of that one was a lot of the top pilots saying they wanted to pull out of that event.
Because the backwards part as well.
Because it was backwards, but also they did want to risk... crashing their drones leading into the finals, which saw, dare I say, some of the dregs of other clubs get pulled up to represent their club. But nonetheless, they all got a good show. I think they all enjoyed the racing on the X-Class track. But for the top 2 Oh, hang on, I've got...
Everyone was happy, I think, flying the S-Class track.
Yeah.
And I think the main decision about making him do it backwards was on the basis that we didn't want certain people get again, a little bit competitive and feel that if someone was to get more runs on the track than them, then that is advantageous to them because, everyone loves to grind like Mason, right?
Which they sure do. Now, just on that, people getting sneaky practice in.
Yeah.
Balloon Busters was another addition to this year's event. Something that perhaps not many people realise the real-world connotations of the Balloon Busters competition until we were doing it.
I think, yeah.
But
I was a late realiser too in that, and then I was like,
yeah. But nonetheless, it was actually quite entertaining. In fact, all the pilots that competed in it commented and spoke about how they really enjoyed it. It was quite a fun and different way of doing a competition. The teams were not club-based; they were just anyone. But they generally fell into a club sort of structure. In the end, size doesn't matter, which was a team consisting mostly of Out of Heaven pilots.
I think they fielded 2 teams. They were very keen, and I think I have it on advice that they were actually practicing balloon busting prior to nationals, as far as like working out the velocity needed and things like that. So they were well equipped. Than most.
They were very keen, and again, some very interesting places to hide balloons. Some very sneaky and devilish ways. Obviously, I think as it goes forward, rules can be a bit more developed in that, but it was quite entertaining.
It definitely was an experiment of something that was not racing thrown into a nationals event, and I think it worked quite well. And I think only a few tweaks needed. And I think I'd be happy to see a return of that event again.
Yeah, certainly. I think it was interesting.
Remember, I really had an idea a few months ago to do a capture the flag, and we'd have RGB things and hovering, and that's something like that just requires a lot more preparation and a lot more special Dan coding time. Dan from FPV Trackside, just to make the game modes for me. I'm working on him on it, and I think maybe next year we'll have be able to maybe try those at Tiny Whoops or something like that.
Yeah, it's probably a much better place to trial it. But nonetheless, they are the quick overview really of the results from the event. But there's a lot of talking points, a lot of things we want to talk about. First up, the long days. We spoke about this on the news just prior to. We went from 4 days to 3 days. And then they turned into quite 14-hour days almost.
I feel like we should have known better. Having done like an Avalon Air Show together and a couple of those Wollongong ones, knowing that they're full 8-hour days, that squeezing in another 4 or 5 on top would be exhausting. The
interesting thing we also found is that YouTube has a 12-hour limit on your live streams.
Oh, that got me.
So a lot of the things at the end of our day on the live streams on this channel are lost in a sense that we would have to try.
It's about 2 hours from the Saturday, I think, or 2 hours from the Friday. Yeah. So some of those days went for 13, 14 hours of streaming because we didn't quite keep the schedule as we'd intended.
Yeah.
And so therefore they're lost in the ether. Actually, they still exist. I've got some local recordings, but at request I can resurface them.
And obviously we're talking a little bit about us who are there running the event. Zach and Scotty as well are helping. But the general vibe I got from a lot of the pilots as well is that they were tired as well. So
can't fly your best if you're tired.
Certainly. That also leads on. But nonetheless, the long days did leave us with night racing.
I love that.
And that was exciting. A huge shout out to Dave from Canberra for the fire LED gate, which caught, I think, a lot of spectators out, especially with all the fires in X-Class. Number of times you looked up thinking the start-finish gate was on fire, but that's just the very cool effects from the LEDs.
That really worked. I think there were certain moments where I was looking back on some of the finals footage and looking in the first place in footage of some parts, you could see the gate flashing a different colour and knowing that someone had just been right ahead of you. So it gave you an indication visually as you were crossing the gate of who was in front of you if you could remember their channel colour. So I think a bit more interactivity with that could happen. And if you had more gates all done like that, like at the end of the day, if the whole track was one of those gates, you could basically have the whole thing coloured as pilots went through, and I think it'd be a really good visual experience.
An very, very interesting thing from the night racing was that obviously I spoke about on the stream, I spoke to a lot of pilots. We've enjoyed night racing because your visibility is sort of is better. The consistent light really helps see the track and navigate through it, except if you're fast. I spoke to young Wilf just before the night racing, or one of the nights of racing, and spoke about how he's going. And he says, I hate night racing. I thought, why? Why would you hate night racing? I love it. I can see everything. He goes, well, no, I'm going through corners blind. Well, what do you mean? The top pilots are going so fast through the track that they are getting motion blur in their camera lens from the light, and because it's dark, and they're getting motion blur, so they're going through corners blind in some instances.
I've never experienced.
So if you're fast, I guess night racing's not that great, but for every other mug, it's brilliant.
I've got to experience that in the goggles. If I had known, I would have cracked out my goggles. I think
it was interesting. But he commented that obviously it's split second. You wouldn't. You probably couldn't perceive it at our age. We probably couldn't perceive the blindness of the speed that he's going.
Has anyone made Carl of HD0 aware of this?
Apparently, I think it's a rolling shutter. I was looking at it because I bought a Nano 90 camera from you just before this recording from risingsunfpv.com.au.
Oh, right, of course.
Just to put that out there. The rolling shutter. So apparently there is a slight motion blur. So if you're fast, apparently night racing isn't the thing.
Well, isn't all that's cracked up to be, maybe?
Admittedly, it didn't affect Wilf at all.
Yeah, he still won.
I think night racing stays. Moving on, another interesting thing to talk about is the ready switch.
Oh, the ready. That didn't work. That didn't work.
I was about to say, what are your thoughts on the ready switch?
That didn't work so well. It didn't work so well because I suppose it was hard to see in the camera feed a lot of the time. The ready wasn't necessarily in the most obvious place. And we didn't know who had it and who also didn't have it. So we didn't know when we were meant to be waiting for it versus waiting for it.
Yeah, and still pilots continue to turn off their HD0 video. So most times before we even see the ready switch, we're still just getting them to turn the video on. I think also having the pilots so far away from the race headquarters.
That was an extra challenge.
Caused some extra challenges. So some little things to work on there, but obviously, ready switch was one of the big changes that people were getting ready for. A lot of pilots upset they had to upgrade their firmware, but just upgrade. But yeah, I don't think there's some more work that could be done there. I think local club races, it definitely has its advantages.
Something for a ready flag needs to be done, but I don't think the ready switch in your OSD is there. And I think something else that I think we can maybe put Dave to make, maybe the
a little button, perhaps.
Perhaps. I've got some ideas. And I think Dave's got some ideas too. That I think a future big event, I think, can have a bit more technology that can sort of ease the need of having additional staff there helping through. We got a bit of trickiness in the roster where we were literally running races and then I was generating heats, but there was no clear way to communicate those rosters without just shouting it to people. So I think some improvements around getting the data from trackside out to a screen that's where the parts are gridding up or getting ready to, I think will be really critical in ironing out some of those throughput
just little quirks. Yeah. I think there's some things to look at. But just to wrap up, I guess, overall for this year's Nationals, I've got some data that I want to talk about, and that's participation rates.
Okay, yeah.
It's a good bit of a vibe check, you could call it, a health check for the sport in Australia. How are we tracking? So I've got data here. I'll have to read it out, so I do apologise. But this year's Nationals saw an increase in our female participation rate.
Good to see.
6% of our pilots were female, which is excellent, which is double than what I think Multi-GP have been seeing, which is sitting around about 3.5%. So that's great
healthy
for Australian pilots. Great female participation. Out of Heaven was the most dominant club there. In fact, that was
by count. You mean
by count? They had about 17 pilots who attend. And that was evidenced by the Bones chants come finals time. They were really deafening out.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't limited by Out of Heaven members. I think that's like a mob. People just start to jump on it.
So the average age of pilots that attended was 30. Well, 29.6, but 30 was the average age. Our youngest was 10, and our oldest was 68.
Ooh,
so it's a big spread.
That's a good spread.
It's a big spread. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, though. 23% of our pilots at the event were between the age of 15 and 20.
Is that low?
That's the highest group. The highest group. So almost 25% of the pilots are between 15 and 20.
Okay, all in
so
the
the teenagers range. Okay. So obviously the teenagers are a huge force in FPV drone racing in Australia. But we have that spread. The next highest group, which sits around about 16%, is our 35 to 40-year-olds.
Oh, that's me, yeah.
That's us. That's us. So dominated by teenagers from 15 to 20.
Yeah.
And then older people who have probably had some kids, had a bit of a career as well, have some money to be able to spend and enjoying their racing.
Yeah, I suppose maybe it's the 15, 20 drops off because that's when you typically, you might find a girlfriend, whatever. And then you sort of come back again when, you've broken your bones and you can't do mountain biking or other more aggressive sports now. So
yeah, certainly. So and again, just 34% of the pilots were aged below 20. So it's a it's a huge group there. But I guess CT's East News here at 68 kind of stretches out the averages a bit for us.
He was our oldest, was he?
Yeah, certainly. Now, obviously, something to dive into later, probably in another video, is how do the younger pilots compare in their qualifying time versus their finishing place? How do the older pilots go in their qualifying time versus their finishing place?
Yeah, so comparing your ability to qualify versus your ability to focus on eliminations.
We could probably put up a thing, maybe we'll put it up on the screen, a bit of a dot matrix chart.
Just imagine it, and it'll appear just
here. Generally, people finished roughly where they qualified, but there is a bit of a trend that the younger the pilot, the lower they finish from their qualifying time. The older the pilot, the better chance of finishing higher than your qualifying time. Perhaps a bit of experience, a bit of not caring as much might be a factor in that.
Big factor for me, at least.
Big factor, I would say. But just interesting to see how age affects how you qualify. Obviously, qualifying, younger are dominating. But come finals time, the wily old guys, maybe there's a bit of an advantage there. You're not out of the game yet when you get over that hill. Yeah,
certainly. And I reckon a lot of people, there's that question of, if you know someone really fast is going to win and you're not in that group, why do you go? Why do those pilots go? Yep. And I think for a lot of us, it's just to go and have fun and
enjoy. You just love racing.
Love the atmosphere. Hanging out with the boys, and that's really what it was, I think, for a lot of the camera guys. But I think we all stayed in a big Airbnb together, and I think we were reviewing videos every night. And I think a lot of people had a great time, even though they knew they went without a competitive nature.
In fact, that's probably the final thing I want to touch on now before we perhaps look to next year's Nationals and what could be, is the rise and success of Dean's video reviews at the event.
Wow, yeah.
What started as what some people would call a meme, I don't think so. It was a legitimate business created by us and in conjunction with Dean. But they actually came in clutch. Absolutely came in clutch a number of times throughout the event.
Yeah, we had a genuine need when I botched a race start, and then I had to have them help me. I had to call them, a few of them over to manually review.
We had the heartbreak of Sam Tam, where on the final 2 laps, I observed him doing it incorrectly and went, and then when I called it, there was an audible expletive from the grandstand, which then we may have to look at this. And the boys stayed up all night going through every single one of his laps.
Yeah, and that directly impacted me.
Yeah, that actually, yes, that did have an impact
in ways that I did not expect.
Certainly. So, and that's probably something as the sport professionalizes and gets bigger and better, the need for accuracy in reviewing is something that might come forward.
I think that, there should be a responsible entity, team, person, whatever, should be tasked with dealing with that as a whole role. And that doesn't necessarily be live at the time, though, but at least within a certain time frame, be doing those reviews. And I think adding a level of integrity to the scoring, because I think the one person who was the role that I was sitting in was running the trackside, pasting in the results and stuff, was a bit overwhelmed to be catching up on those sort of things at the time. I think when the races are starting, I'm just trying to make sure that the equipment's working, the stream is going, things are playing. I'm not really checking to make sure someone goes around to flag the exact right way. And, but even though I still feel guilty about how that went down.
Yeah, so I think that probably caused to the fact that, especially as we look to next year, the need for more volunteers. People who can assist in the running of the event to make it all run smooth. I think that's one of the things that we needed at times was some extra hands, and it's certainly some of the great FPV dads chipped in.
That was at the end, Andy Harvey, thanks to you for that at the end.
They assisted, but that extra hand, a lot of hands.
90% of that was just you, me, and Scott Townsend, I think. And then at the end, when a lot more communication was needed to keep the throughput going for those eliminations where it gets really screwy. I mean, qualifying is easy, right? You know you're in 5 turns and it's just rinse and repeat. But the eliminations you need a bit more hands on deck to
changing channels and that timings. Sort of stuff. Obviously, with this event, X-Class in between.
Jumping between as well.
A lot of hands would make it easy. So, depending on, and we'll get to this in a second, where Nationals will be next year, but I encourage anyone who has the ability at these bigger events to put their hand up and assist, give us a hand. It's only going to make the events better and bigger and give us more capacity.
I've seen some interest from people out there who are interested in running trackside or improving the stream on their club, and I've been more than willing to help give them files, educate them how to do certain things, and bestow some of the knowledge that I've taken onto others as well to help get them in there and get them involved in running things behind the scenes. And I'd love to be able to have a bit of a roster of people running the trackside, or at least in some way maybe throw it out there, like having a discounted or free racing entry where you then do a shift of running qualifying when you're not flying or
even
something
just helping
like that.
to marshal pilots at the start blocks.
Any one of those things. I know MotoGP do that with the International Open.
Yep.
And then there's a huge effort there in setting up all those tracks in advance and tearing them all down. And so I think that would go a great way in getting a lot more numbers with hands on there.
But that sort of wraps up for 2024 Nationals. And we now look to next year, 2025. The question, where's it going to be? Where do you think, Tim?
Somewhere on the East Coast would be ideal. I know, having been 2 years in Townsville, Townsville was great weather-wise. It was definitely warm, and that having in Canberra, I think in 2022 and 2019, people were cold and they were bothered of all sorts of on all sorts of thermal matters. Yep. I think the problem with Townsville is a little bit too far in that we didn't get some pilots like, I know I was really hoping for Kevin McKenzie to come from New Zealand. And for a lot of others in New Zealand, that extra flight to Townsville was just that little bit too far. So I'd really like to see something in Sydney or Melbourne.
That would be fantastic.
Or even Brisbane, any of the main cities on the East Coast.
It's one of those ones that it's not just an individual. It takes a whole club to really put on an event like this, and it needs one of those clubs to sort of rally around to support and help put it on.
Yeah, you need a well-resourced club. I mean, certainly like Zach, with help from myself and Jared and a few others, they do a lot of the planning, so a lot of the paperwork. But the real club effort is around, resourcing the track build, making sure elements are physically prepared and checking things and doing that sort of physical stuff the day before. And also just, if you're running things like an information booth or running a barbecue, like just manning those activities too to make sure that, pilots are fed or the spectators are engaged or at least shown where to go and that sort of stuff.
Now, obviously, if we do depart from Townsville, will the X-Class and Beast-Class pilots travel? Will we continue to have this multi-spec event occur?
I think so historically the Townsville guys aren't the quickest to register for the event too. So I think for quite a while, I think it sat with quite a low rego. And I think it had it in my head, like if you didn't have 6 pilots showing up for that, what's the point? I think you need at least 6 to enter that class to be viable for an event like this. So if 6 of them are willing to travel, then sure, so be it. I guess it'll be on again. I know Zach still loves it to his heart. And it is pretty cool at a spectator level to see, but I think that maybe if it moves to the side, then maybe it's time to replace it with a spec instead, Bear.
Certainly, I think, here's the question though, there's many different specs that could be flown. You've got your multi-GP 7-inch spec, I think
pro
spec.
There's Street League.
Street League. Tiny Train is another spec. Tiny Whoop is another spec you could look at. Lots of different options, but
drone soccer. We could maybe even do drone soccer. I've seen that as an option in the US.
Actually, another little point that I think I'd raise is the track at this year's Nationals was long, without a doubt, and battery management became a factor. In fact, in that second Chase the Ace race, it was battery that resulted in IQ0 not finishing. And
I saw a DVR from Samuel Evans Ironoid, who also ran out on the last turn.
That's where I guess races. Is our champion becoming the person with the best batteries, and does a spec solve that? Where all the drones are on level playing field, could that solve some of those issues? Do we get the rightful champion, not the person with the best battery or battery management, or is it, which way do we go?
Well, I think that the driving force of Spec Bear is to get more spectator involvement, right?
Yep.
Making it easier for people to understand, wander in and do it. And I think it gives more opportunity for those close races where you're trading positions and because you'll really know that you're at the same speed, that you're better at this turn than I'm better at that turn. So I think there's more opportunity for places to be traded during a race. So I think it could be more exciting.
I think it varies. I think the equipment levels the playing field. But then with that equipment leveling the playing field, then you have sometimes some disproportionate racing. You saw it in the X-Class that once certain pilots got ahead, there were no position changes, particularly in a number of those finals. So that can happen, but when the pilots are equally skilled, that's where it gets really exciting. So those finals will be perfect. But just a little counterpoint to spec racing there. Obviously levels the playing field on an equipment point of view, but some races can be disproportionate and others super exciting. So,
but the point is right. If we were going to replace either the Beast or the S-Class with something else, something needs to be agreed upon, and it needs to be harmonised in that you have enough competitors all meeting whatever that spec is.
Yeah,
to have a game of it.
Open enough that it allows as many people to join in, but at the same time you need to restrict it because it's a spec for a reason. It's a difficult balance.
Because some of the specs, they have a bit of a broad choice of, you can choose between certain frames or certain motors, and some are just exactly that and nothing more. Yeah. So I think it's up to the clubs as a community to have a chat and decide about what they all want to align to.
But exciting, I think, nonetheless, that things are changing.
I look forward to seeing more of the LEDs, Bear. Even if we just enforced RGB LEDs to channel matching again on 5-inch, I'd be happy. I don't need the spec, but that comes with it as part of the course. So I welcome it for the LED reason primarily.
So more night racing on the cards.
More night racing, more LED gates.
Sorry, Wilf. So that wraps up Nationals and the Australian scene. Let's talk about some other racing news around the traps. At the same time that the Drone Nationals was going on, we had a team from the Australian military go over to London and compete in the Military International Drone Racing Tournament for this year.
Oh, so good.
And they came away and took the victory. They absolutely wiped the floor with all the other nations.
Did your heart sink a little bit when you saw Propsicle and
Leviathan were on the list?
Was it Leviathan?
Leviathan and Propsicle, and I could only look at their haircuts and think, how are they in the military? But I think they just got
haircuts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really thought with that I thought, okay, the US has instantly recruited them and dragged them along just so they could win. I thought, oh no, here we go. But no, then it actually was the actual teams, and I couldn't be prouder of the boys taking home a third gold.
Yeah.
I knew I went over with confidence, but also too, they did that little flex video. You saw how strong their social media channel was. The little flex video with the "We Are the Champions" playing by Queen. I thought, oh boy, you can't drop that and then not win. So
yeah, absolutely dominant performance. Admittedly, perhaps some of the other nations there are more used to crashing zones than to racing them to victory. But
maybe to say that if they were doing balloon buses, it may have been a different outcome.
Could have been a different outcome. Probably the biggest news, aside from all the drone racing stuff that we've discussed, is that the drone racing news has been a massive success across Australia. In fact, it's gained the eye of a number of sponsors, business buyers. People are absolutely enthralled with the drone racing news, the quality of product that we've produced, and we've been in discussions. A number of prospective buyers have been speaking to us about expanding and growing the show.
Acquisition discussions.
Certainly. And so what will be happening from here is that we'll probably go on a bit of a hiatus. The channel will go a little bit quiet, not the channel, but the news.
The news part
will go quiet. We'll be back in 2025, bigger and better than ever before.
I reckon. A lot of options on the table for us to
certainly
ponder over.
Yep.
Big decision to make.
A lot of lessons learnt from having done the news previously, and it's only going to get bigger and better.
And we might sort of stick to this podcast style format.
I think if it's successful, drop a comment in the thing, let us know if this format is good. We're here in the Rising Sun Canberra warehouse, Tim's shed, the shrine to the history of drone racing in Australia.
The shelf of memories.
Really is the altar of Australian drone racing here.
I'm still adding to it as I find bits and pieces too. And one day I think I'll even do a video and go through and maybe tell stories about some or maybe in the podcast, maybe I can bring one.
Bring an item out and say, dust it off.
This one is there's an interesting story behind this.
this bolt here.
If you like the Abrahamson tied an onion to my belt.
Anyway, that is all. If you want that kind of content, that's coming. But perhaps let us know in the comments if you like this style, if it's better than the green screen studio set that we had. But
we welcome the feedback.
But
take into consideration when we reincarnate maybe in the Phoenix.
Bigger and better things coming for the drone news.
All right. Thank you and goodbye.
See yous.